Right. John, one very often we have noticed that people confuse about enterprise architecture to do more to do with IT, and we have discussed several times that it's actually an enterprise issue. So maybe a CEO or maybe a sales director or a department director or business head or maybe an IT some head, right? So uh, it's an IT issue, but it looks like we are seeing year after year that uh, is not going away, right? That confusion continues to stick in the market. Uh, what is the way out? What has to be done? What is your take on getting out of this problem? Because unless until the right people understand it, I mean, this is what we have seen, in Sydney, in London, in Washington, in Dallas, Denver, Singapore, Bangalore, Norway. I'm like, wherever we have gone, we have seen that people saying on that, oh, my boss should have been here, my CEO should have been here, my vice president should have been here. Where is the problem? Why the message is not reaching them?
Well, no, I mean, there's a couple of issues that are causing the problem. One thing is, first of all, I'll say that enterprise architecture is not on the CEO's radar. They got so many other things to worry about. The stress levels are so high. Enterprise architecture is the last thing they're thinking about. They don't even have those words in their vocabulary.
So John,
And the reason why
can I just say one thing here? So so I agree to what you're saying, but so is that the problem here is that the current prevailing practice of enterprise architecture, since it's been seen as a model creation exercise, 8 month, 9 month before I will deliver something substantial. Are these two reasons why CEO, this is not in the radar screen of the CEO?
Yeah, basically they don't connect up the concept of enterprise architecture with the concept of the enterprise. There's not a connection there, so they don't see an association. So therefore, enterprise architecture is not on their radar. They don't see it as helping them. Okay, and the problem is the words enterprise architecture come from the IT community because the IT people raise the issue. The IT people say, look, Chief, we have to have a way to transcribe what you're thinking about because it doesn't make any difference what we're doing, how fast our processors are, how modern the operating systems are, how clever the programming is, and until we have a way to transcribe what you're thinking about, it doesn't make any difference what we're doing. We're never going to produce anything that has any relationship with what you're thinking about. So we're going to have to do some enterprise architecture. We have to transcribe what you're thinking about, but we have to transcribe it in such a fashion we can do some engineering work with it. Okay, so IT tends to raise the issue, and general management people think it's an IT issue because we raise the issue. It's not our issue at all. It's the enterprise issue, but we're raising it, so they think it's our issue. Okay, and so they're not connecting it up with the reality of their own experience, of the general manager's experience. And then if general management says, okay, we're going to do enterprise architecture, okay, you guys, I hear you, let's do something with it, IT brings the skills to bear to create the descriptive representation. So people think, IT thinks, and general management thinks the enterprise architecture is building models. Well, enterprise architecture is not building models. It is trying to solve enterprise problems. So we lost the connection between the enterprise general management and their problems and whatever enterprise architecture is doing. But if enterprise architecture is not producing single variable primitive models, they are not solving general managers' problems. So basically, over time, it tends to deteriorate. Well, we tried that and it really doesn't work. So we need to change our own perception. We need to get first of all, we better understand that if you want to engineer enterprises so you can accommodate complexity and dynamic change, you're going to have the primitive models. You got to get them into inventory, and you've got to get enough of them into inventory you can solve general management problems up front very quickly. If you can solve general management problems up front really quickly, then you won't have any trouble getting the resources to continue to do enterprise architecture over time, because there's a lot of problems out there to solve. So you've got to connect up the enterprise architecture with the problem. And the way to do that is to build the primitive models and get them into inventory. And then you can start solving general managers' problems. They may not even know what you're doing. They may not know what you're doing in enterprise architecture. Well, they don't have to know everything. Someday, I'll tell you what, someday the general manager, if they discover what enterprise architecture is doing, they ought to be saying, oh my gosh, I ought to do this myself. I can do this. You know, I can create dynamic versions of my enterprise on the fly. I can get really creative. I can sketch out, you know, a new enterprise and test it out, you know, prototype it to see how I like it. I could prototype a dozen and then figure out which one I like. And there's no reason why the general manager couldn't do that kind of thing if you have the inventory of primitive models. Now the general manager may not build all the models, but he or she can create the composite constructs and test them out and, you know, prototype things. They can get really creative. So, you know, I think that's probably where it goes over time. But we don't have the connection between primitive models, the ontology, and the general management problem. That's not there. That's why you have the problem. The more fundamental problem is the IT people don't even believe in the primitive models. So, well, you know, if you would just say, okay, here is an ontology. I'm sure that the alchemists back in Mendeleyev's days, somebody said, geez, we can't break the periodic table. Maybe the thing is right. Let's figure out what to do with it. That's kind of what we ought to be doing.
I think it's important because eventually we know for sure that when looking at the realization of an idea in the terms of instantiation, there are already people, senior folks, the great CEOs that the world has ever seen. Their mental models are actually so they already have mental models which they transform within their brain with the help of their team. And what we're trying to do is get that mental models out from the brain to a more explicit representation, so that more people can work together and ensure that these transformations are more accurate, timely, and so it's eventually will happen. And you're right that for some unfortunate reasons, you know, since the focus is more on creating composites without understanding the primitives, they are finding, and people are struggling to cope up with the change and complexity. And I think if I'm correct in saying that your framework is the solution to only two problems. The one problem is the accurate representation of instantiation, mapping to the idea, and second is change and complexity management. So your framework can only solve two problems, John.
Yeah, well, those are two good problems to work on.
I remember you saying that
you know,
one of your friend did a survey of the top 200, 150 CEOs, and what was the common problem?
It was really interesting. He talked to very high visibility CEOs, and every one of them, to a person, I was shocked. Every one of them said the biggest problem facing the enterprise is change. But my reaction was, if the CEO thinks the biggest problem facing the enterprise is change, where is the executive vice president in charge of change management? Because if nobody's in charge, the probability is low to zero to affect change. And if you tell somebody, hey, go out and do a survey of 7,000 years of history to find out how humanity has figured out how to manage change, about the first thing they're going to figure out is Someday, Chief, you're going to wish you had all these primitive models in inventories, because how else do you manage change? You've got to get the primitive components, the bills of material, the functional specs, the geometry, the operating instructions, the concept, the logic. You're going to have those in inventory, because there's no other way humanity for 7,000 years has figured out how to manage change. So who ought to own enterprise architecture in the enterprise? Well, probably whoever's in charge of change, the executive vice president in charge of change management. If it was owned by general management, there wouldn't be any problem creating or using or learning how to use better enterprise architecture.
So that's interesting. If the change management is one of the biggest challenge facing the enterprises around the world, and here we have is an enterprise ontology in place, and which can possibly help us to address that. And I think what is really powerful is that as we start to learn this techniques for identifying primitive and understand the application of Zachman framework, the biggest advantage I see is that in a short span of time, in fact, we have seen in a short cycles of a few weeks, maybe 4 weeks and 6 weeks, you could start to address some of the problems which otherwise were unimaginable. It was next to impossible to even dream that that could be touched upon in a span of 6 to 8 months. And as John did mention about in one of the that when you start to work on this, you will actually realize that when you actually try to fix one or two set of primitives, you will not just solve one problem, you could actually solve multiple problems. So yeah, I think this is very, very powerful, John.